Fairfield County 4-H and FFA members who take a market swine project have the unique opportunity to actually see and taste the meat quality they produce with their project. The Muscle Quality and Performance Program, MQP for short, is a real-world livestock production and marketing experience that few can enjoy with any other project. Completion of an MQP project allows young livestock producers and exhibitors to gain practical experience in feeding and marketing pigs in much the same fashion as commercial pork producers do. Participants gain an understanding of the relationship genetics and feeding play in the efficient production of quality pork. Selecting project pigs at an early age which possess the ability to grow quickly and efficiently while maintaining high pork product quality is vital in successfully completing an MQP project. On July 11th in 2009, 19 youth brought Barrows weighing 75 pounds and under to the fairgrounds in order to be identified and weighed for the commencement of the MQP program. These pigs were then returned home and fed. 85 days later, 17 exhibitors completed the project by returning their Barrows to the fairgrounds, at which time the pigs were again weighed and also evaluated for their appearance of meat quality, finish, and structure. The 17 Barrows had gained an average of 2.28 pounds per day on feed. Upon completion of this live evaluation process, the pigs were transported to the Ohio State University Meat Lab, where they were harvested and evaluated on their meat qualities. In addition to quality, scoring, and placing in the program's competition was based on a combination of factors which also included performance. Let's listen as OSU Extension Meat Specialist Dr. Henry Zerby explains how meat quality and characteristics vary from carcass to carcass and why some are more valuable in the marketplace and to the consumer than others.
Some differences here that we have before we get into some other stuff. What we do, we go through, first of all, we measure back fat and loin muscle area, the two things in carcass weight. Those three things go into calculating percent lean. As you look up and down this row, you can see differences in back fat. You can also see differences in loin muscle area. When we look at loin muscle area, we only measure the longissimus dorsi muscle. We do not measure this muscle, this little muscle up here, or a little muscle there. We just measure the longissimus dorsi muscle. And to do that, I know a lot of you have seen this, we take a grid and we lay a grid on there and we count the number of dots that touch that muscle. This particular grid has 20 dots per square inch, so we divide that number of dots by 20 to get square inches. Okay? So that's grid in those eyes. Back fat, we measure the thickness of the back fat including the skin. Skin on, so we include the skin on that. And on pigs, they're very similar to beef. The only difference is in beef, we rib between the 12th and 13th rib. Pigs, we rib between 10th and 11th. Okay, so this is the 10th rib surface. That's our 10th rib in there. And we come 3/4 of the way down from the split surface of the spine. So we're going to come 3/4 of the way down. So draw an imaginary line halfway through that eye, an imaginary line halfway through that half. And then we measure that back fat, and we go to the nearest 5/100th or 1/2-tenth. Okay? Beef and lamb are both 3/4. Beef and pigs are both 3/4 of the eye. Lamb we do in the middle of the eye. So pigs or pork carcasses are very similar to beef in that respect. So that's where our back fat measurement came from that you're going to see in that data sheet. That's where the loin muscle came from. The other things that we measured were quality attributes. Okay? We measure color. Okay? Visual color, what we have as a scale. On a scale of 1 to 6, and I think this sheet has some color. This kind of gives you an idea of the color. This isn't a perfect scale, but you can see 1 very light colored, very pale, grayish kind of. We get up into this is a 4 color, a pretty dark color. Since we have that scale of visual color. Most of the time, most of the pork we deal with is going to be about a 2. You have some 1s in there. You have a lot of 2s in there. A couple of 3s, and I think there may even be a 4, one that's pushing a 4. We also measure marbling, visual marbling, and we're just looking at the amount of this intramuscular fat. You can see this one has some marbling in it, okay? Pretty decent marbling. So that's going to be a score in the neighborhood of a 3. This one has a lot less marbling. This one might be a 2 or it might be a 1 depending on who's calling us. So these things are subjective, but we have the same person call them so that the scale is the same across it. You can see some of these other chops here where you really struggle to find any flecks of fat in there, or if you just see a few flecks of fat in there, that's going to be a marble score 1. Okay? The other thing that we're going to do is firmness. And firmness, again, is pretty subjective. We just use the old finger test, and we push into that chop, and it's how much resistance we have, okay? Or how much it springs back. And so we score that on a 1, 2, or 3. 1 being really soft, 3 being pretty firm, 2 being intermediate. And there are some in here that are pretty soft. The other thing we do on a scale of 1, 2, or 3 is wetness. And that's how dry the surface of that chop is. 3 would be dry, and 1 would be wet or have a lot of fluid on it. 2 would be intermediate. When you look at some of these trays, for example this one, you can see that a lot of that fluid's laying down there. You can bet that that one scored a 1 because that water's running out of there. And I will tell you that wetness and firmness often go in the same direction. Okay? Because if you think what this muscle is made up of a bunch of cells. Okay? And these cells are 75% water. The easiest way to think about wetness and firmness is think of a muscle cell being a Ziploc bag. And you jam-pack that thing full of water and zip it shut. When you push on, it's going to be pretty firm. If you open up and let just a little bit of water out and seal it back up, now it's going to be pretty soft. And that's exactly what's happening here. When those muscle cells, when all the proteins in those muscle cells start to lose their ability to bind water, because those proteins have denatured due to heat and pH combinations that were undesirable during post-mortem metabolism, that water is now not bound to proteins, it is free water. So when we cut that surface, it just kind of comes right out. Some of these, I will tell you that when we ribbed that pork carcass and we came back 5 minutes later, there was water dripping out of that muscle. When that water drips out of that muscle in the cooler, and then is going to continue to come out of that muscle later on, that is a whole lot less water that we're going to have in that thing after we cook it to improve juiciness. And that's where we get into issues with pork being dry. And when consumers consume pork or any meat product and it's dry, they often also associate dryness with toughness. It may actually be tender, but we're not good enough, most consumers aren't good enough to distinguish the difference between tender and dry. So if it has one negative attribute, they associate it with all the other palatability attributes as well. So we can get into a little bit of trouble with some of those things. The other thing we did was objective color. We used the Minolta color meter. It's a machine that shoots the light out and measures the reflectance of that light. We just use L-scale, L-star. You'll see L-star on that data sheet. That's a machine measurement of color. And it corresponded pretty well with the visual color, which meant we didn't do too bad of a job, actually. What else did we measure, Megan? I think that's most of them. Now, just give you a few. Marbling, yeah, that's what we did talk about. Marbling. Show them marbling cards. Oh, you put them over there. So we called marbling on these, just to give you an idea of marbling, that scale of marbling. This would be a 1 where we have very little marbling. This would be a 2. You have to have some marbling in there to qualify for 2. And as you get more, we go up that line, there's a 3. And we'd struggle to get anything up above 5 in this group. Okay. There are some loins in the cooler we can show you that I would score as a 4 or a 5. They are certainly out of different genetics than these pigs are.
Those never make it to the grocery store.
They get cherry picked coming through, just like these did. Those have my name on them. It's good to be the king. Good to be the king. What else was I just... Oh, I will tell you. And you guys, some of you know it and saw it. There were some structure issues in this set of hogs. I'm not surprised that we have some that did not hold up on the quality side of things, looking at those pigs live. What's going to hurt quality? Stress. Stress is going to hurt quality. And there's a lot of stress that can be happening that you might not see, physiological stress. And when we start stacking this kind of weight on a skeleton that wasn't necessarily designed to handle this kind of weight, that's all the more importance to have correct structure. Because once we start getting things that are a little bit over on the front end or a little bit over on the back end, or starting to get pigs that are a little bit too short in their toes, they can compensate for that until we start putting excess weight on that skeleton, and then they start breaking down. Now, those pigs had to ride on a trailer, and they came up here, and that probably didn't help. But any pig you're going to send to market, a lot of times you're going to be sending a fair distance. And we don't think about that because out of sight, out of mind, once they leave the barn, we don't think about what they're riding on, what's happening to them from there on in. I will tell you there were some structure issues. We had a few pigs that we weren't sure were going to make it, but they all did. They all did. That's the good news. Now, from a percent lean standpoint, when you take a look at these pigs, remember, or these chops, remember I told you that basically it's hot carcass weight, and then it's fat, and then it's muscle. What you need to know about percent lean is the difference in fat in that formula is much more important than the difference in muscle. I shouldn't say it's more important. It has a greater emphasis than the difference in muscle. The reason for that is we're going to have more variation in fat thickness from one pig to another a lot of times if they're the same physiological age than we are muscle. And so it contributes more to percent lean. As you look up and down this row, there are differences in muscle, but there's probably more differences on average in fat thickness than there is muscle. So there's a couple different ways to get a high percent lean. You can get a high percent lean by not having very much back fat, or you can get a high percent lean by having a very large loin muscle area. The example of high percent lean with not much back fat are these couple down here on the bottom. These are two of the highest, actually they are, two of the highest percent lean carcasses in the contest. They do not have very large loin eyes, but they do not have very much fat. And so percent lean is a fat to muscle ratio. Okay? Now, as a matter of fact, 775, where's 775? You want to hold that one up a second? 775 had a percent lean that calculated out to 57.2. This one had a percent lean that calculated out to 57.7. So take 775 and 785. They had almost the same percent lean, but for two different reasons. Okay, this one has quite a bit more muscle than this one. And this one has just a little bit less back fat than that one. That's just to show you the difference in the ratio in that formula of how important fat is in that formula to the importance of muscle in that formula.
I might interject, the 85 was a pig that weighed 200-pound live. So it's unfortunately not going to be in the contest because, and probably would lead to your higher percent lean.
Yep. The weight also, a lighter weight pig will gain in that formula.
And the other weighed 285.
285. Yep. So
almost 85-pound difference.
And so that's a good point. These percent leans and percent cutability formulas, take them with a grain of salt because they cater to trim and they cater to light, and that's not always what we're after. If you're purely marketing on percent lean, then you send real trim, light pigs. The problem is that even though you get a premium on percent lean, you lose so much on pounds that may cost you money in the long run. So you have to be careful when you start chasing formulas, and you have to understand what drives those formulas. Okay, that's just one measurement. It's not the only thing we need to look at. Okay, so that's just an example of percent lean. Now, the other thing I need to tell you when we start lining these things up from a quality standpoint, You get so many points for lean gain or rate of gain. You get so many points for percent lean, and you get so many points for quality. However, the first thing we do is combat the quality for the consumer, and we separate these things into tiers, and then we rank them on points within that classification. So we say acceptable quality. To get acceptable quality, it has to have at least a 2 on color, a 2 on firmness, and a 2 on wetness. It can't have a 1 on marbling and still be an acceptable quality. If it has a 1 in wetness, firmness, or color, we're going to put it into the next category, which is marginal quality. If it has a 1 in all 3 of those categories, firmness, wetness, and color, it is PSE, and we put it in the next category, which is unacceptable quality. So on the sheet that we're going to pass out, you will see these things ranked first on all those in acceptable quality, then all those that were in marginal quality, then unacceptable quality at the bottom are the 2 that were ineligible because of weight. Okay? So you understand how we do that. Those other things are very important, but at the end of the day, we come back and put them into criteria based on what we think they're going to do for the consumer. Okay? So any questions on the rankings before, or how we score and rank things before I pass out some sheets or...
Just a comment. This is the pig, one of the Summers girls pig, the fastest growing pig as far as rate of gain.
Yeah.
And I think we mentioned during the evaluation that we just thought he was just going to be carrying too much cover. We just showed it around his tail head and a couple other things. And I think once you can see this in the cooler, especially, and I'm not cutting this pig down at all because it grew extremely fast, but compared to some of the other pigs, you can really see. I don't know what the fat level was there, but it looks like it's closing in on an inch pretty easy.
A little over an inch.
Yeah. So I mean, but then Kenry answered the question. You've got IPC and Tyson and everybody. Their grids are. I think the national average is 285 or 290.
Yep.
Are we sending a lot of pigs to town that have this much cover on them, and what's the purpose of that? I mean, certainly if we could do every pig like this at 285 or 90, that would be fine. But
yeah, and that's what you're talking about is some of the real rapid changes we've seen in pigs in the industry in the last 10 years. We are marketing pigs at heavier weights for these bigger companies. They are taking, like you said, 285, 290. Those pigs are probably coming in on average between 8/10 and an inch. Some of those might be pushing just a little over an inch. A lot of them aren't up to, that one's 1.3. But you will notice when you go through your barn, if you're raising hogs for those companies and you're usually sorting pigs out when they hit that weight, the fastest growing pigs in your barn typically are going to be the fattest pigs in your barn as well. So when you're going in there and if you're selecting replacement stuff based on visual appraisal and you're picking out the fastest growing gilts you have, you're probably selecting fat genetics. So that's why when you go in, if you're going to do some selection and things on your own stuff, it would behoove you to do some ultrasound. So you want fast-growing pigs, you want efficient pigs, but you also want fast-growing, heavy muscle pigs that give you pretty nice quality. So yeah, I'm not surprised that this was the fastest or had the best lean gain. Now, does that mean it was the most efficient in terms of feed efficiency? No. So we have to be careful there because a lot of times the biggest correlation to growth rate is frame size, but also appetite. This pig probably had a larger appetite than its pen mates. It probably ate more when you put that feed in there. It ate a bigger portion of that because it ate more. It had much more excess energy. And what do we do with extra energy? We store it as fat. So this pig was the fastest growing. I'm not sure it was the most efficient or the best money maker. And then when we put it on a grid, we know it's not going to be the best money maker. And so there's some checks and balances. There's really some thought process into this swine industry and actually making some money out of these guys down the road. So that's a good one to bring
that
out.
pig started out at 42 pounds and ended up at 285. Now, he wasn't the heaviest pig. The Bailey Myers pig started out at 70 and ended up at 310. So, the rate of gain wise, it was smaller to start with.
So I want to show you this chop. This is one. What would you guys say the color is on that? Pretty good? Not so good? It's pretty pale. It's really pale in the middle, okay? And you can see that it's pretty watery. And if you kind of just touch on there, pretty soft, go ahead, stick your finger in there and push down a little bit. Yeah, so this is an example of what we score: a 1 on color, a 1 on wetness, and a 1 on firmness. This chop fell into the unacceptable category. This is another one. You see there's a lot of water in there, pretty pale, very soft. Okay? Another one that fell into the unacceptable category. This one was probably borderline whether it should be a 1 or 2 on color. Extremely soft, and actually you don't see as much water in the tray, but it was pretty wet as well. So those are 3 that kind of fell down in the unacceptable category. This one has really nice color, but there's not much there in terms of muscle size. We get into some challenges there. This is a pretty nice chop. We're going to have to take some trim off that to make it presentable, but a nice chop. It's got some marbling inside of it. You can see some marbling there. Pretty decent color on that one. I can tell you, if I'm buying pork chops in a retail store, which I don't very often, if I'm buying pork chops in a retail store or from here, 2 things I look for are a little bit darker color and marbling. Marbling is going to give you flavor. It's also going to give you juiciness. A little bit darker color to me tells me that that muscle actually has a little bit higher pH. It's actually the pH of that meat that allows it to hold that water. The reason that one's running out, what you have to do, think about meat. Meat is a protein sponge. 75% water, 18.5% protein. It's the protein that holds that in there. When we get our pH down, that sponge collapses on itself. What happens to a sponge when you push down on it? What happens to the water? It goes out. Meat is a protein sponge. When we get a low pH, that sponge is collapsing on itself. When I see a darker color, that tells me I have a little bit higher pH. Usually that's going to be a little bit juicier. It's going to hold a little bit more water, and going to be a little bit better product. So,
Can you feed things to animals to improve, or is that the quality or not? Or is it just a
it's
genetic
not
thing?
as simple as that. We certainly can impact quality through nutrition, but not nutrition alone. So you have genetics that you start with, you have the nutrition, and then of course you have the management and the handling. And it's all those things combined. So it's not, you can't fix poor genetics with good nutrition. You can't fix poor management or handling with good nutrition. A breakdown in any one of those 3, a breakdown in genetics, a breakdown in nutrition, or a breakdown in management or handling practices, breakdown any one of those will ruin the other 2, or the money that you've invested in the other 2. And that's probably the way to think about it. You need to have good genetics, sound hogs, you need to have a good nutrition program, and you need to have good handling practices. So that's probably the way to think about that. Now, these happen to be sitting here. Don't want to spoil everything for you, but these happen to be sitting here in their final rank. Top to bottom.
On the whole thing?
On the whole thing. The pig on top, the quality, have you look at that quality. And what helped this pig out quite a bit was its quality index. Very good color. The most marbling probably of any one in there. It's carrying some fat, so its percent lean probably isn't as high as some of the others. Had a pretty good growth rate. all things combined, it was in the acceptable category. I will tell you that only the top 6 stayed in the acceptable category. And so the top 6, this one had the best combination of quality, growth, and percent lean down the line. Okay? So the numbers, the proof is in the sheet. And I'll let you guys pick these up and study them. What we have here, the same data top and bottom. All the data's down here is pretty hard to read, so we took some of the columns out, made the more important stuff a little bit bigger up in the top. So it's the same data top and bottom. We'll let you guys grab some of those and start studying. Sorry to ruin the surprise, but I think it's good for you guys to kind of walk up and down that line and look at that and understand why some of them went higher, why some of them went lower. And we can answer questions that you have.
At the conclusion of the MQP project experience, each exhibitor had the opportunity to have their harvested project pigs cut and packaged to their specifications for return to their own freezer and consumption at home. This experience brought the completion of this project full circle, beginning with the selection as a feeder pig and culminating with the experience of enjoying consumption of the quality pork which the exhibitor had produced. Those pigs which did not return home as freezer pork were purchased by the Ohio State University Meat Lab and merchandised in the department's campus meat store. This unique project is made available to 4-H and FFA students in Fairfield County through the cooperative effort of the Ohio State University, Ohio State University Extension, and the Fairfield County Senior Fair Board. Special thanks for their effort and support which make this program a reality are extended to OSU Meat Specialist Dr. Henry Zerby, OSU Swine Specialist Dr. Steve Moeller, Fairfield County MQP Swine Superintendent Brian Black, David Weinkoop of Failer Feed Store, Fairfield County OSU Extension staff member Stan Smith, and the staff and students of the Ohio State University Meat Lab. Youth choosing to participate in the 2010 edition of the Fairfield County MQP program will have their barrows weighing 75 pounds or less tagged and weighed from 8 a.m. until 10 a.m. on Saturday, July 10th at the fairgrounds in Lancaster. Refer to your junior fair book, contact your advisor, or contact the Fairfield County office of Ohio State University Extension for more details.